Today we're going to be rebuilding this Demon carburetor. As you can see, this Demon has seen much better days. In fact, we've actually seen this Demon on this channel way back, probably 4 or 5 years ago, when I actually set the idle when I first installed it on our 1973 Plymouth Duster. 4 or 5 years down the road to today, of course it's going to need a rebuild. It's kind of leaking everywhere. It doesn't idle quite right. So we're going to take it apart, clean it, replace whatever needs to be replaced, and then go ahead and put it back together. For those of you wondering, this was what was called a Speed Demon by Barry Grant. Barry Grant no longer owns Demon. Holley owns Demon, so the names are all different. Don't bother to look up a Speed Demon in a current catalog because it's a completely different carburetor. In order to identify this carburetor, we're going to look at a few things. The first one is that we know that it's a 650 main body because there's a 6 right here on the opposite side of the choke horn. So that actually gives us a really good place to start. We can see that we've got annular boosters in the secondaries and we've got down leg boosters in the primaries. So down leg boosters increase CFM by 30 allegedly, and annular boosters drop CFM by 20 allegedly. So the closest thing in the Barry Grant catalog was the Speed Demon 625, and this is actually what it ended up being. Vacuum secondaries, 4-barrel 4150 style carburetor. Now let's go ahead and start tearing this guy down. I'm going to start with the fuel rail because that's going to get in the way of most of what we're going to be trying to do here. So these are -6 fittings. I'm going to use my adjustable AN wrench to try to take this off, and it looks like the fitting is spinning inside of the bowl, so I'm not going to be able to take that one off. And if I go and try the other one, let's see if that one allows me to take it off. And same thing, it's spinning. So I'm going to need to hold one side with an adjustable wrench, and then the other side I'm gonna go ahead and pop this guy off. I believe it's like an 11/16 if you guys wanted to do this without the adjustable wrenches, but since I have the right size adjustable wrenches here on hand, it's much easier for me to just do that instead of looking for a bunch of separate wrenches. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the fuel bowls, and these are actually Allen bolts instead of the standard hex bolts or flathead bolts that you see in Holley and Proform style carburetors. In order to take those off, you're going to need an Allen key. This one's going to be a 1/4 inch, but in a pinch you could use a 6mm, although I do not recommend it. Now hopefully this bowl just pops right off, and of course it doesn't, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of massaging. I'm going to take a regular flathead screwdriver and put it in between the choke horn and the bowl, and that's typically where I do it on Holleys, and it kind of works on Demons as well. And just like that. You could do it on the sides as well, but you tend to mar it up a little bit, and if you do it on the sides it will kind of be a little bit more visible. So I try not to do it on the sides, but sometimes it is inevitable. So like that, this corner was really stuck, and now the opposite corner has to come off as well, and now it should just pull right off. All right. So looking at the primary bowl on the inside, it actually looks like the float is set like way too low. I don't know who was in here last time, but this is not where the float is supposed to sit. They might be having some needle and seat issues, so we're going to need to go ahead and take care of that. It also looks like it has a 50cc accelerator pump, so we're going to be putting a new diaphragm in that and cleaning up these parts as well. Moving on to the metering block, where it's the same basic operation. Try to work a little bit slow so that way you don't tear anything up and make it look all nasty. And if you're not careful, you will break the pins off of the metering block, so be very careful with that as well. Like I mentioned, this carburetor was assembled a couple years back, but even still the gaskets have not really stuck to the main body, so I'm not going to need to do a lot of cleaning or scraping on these gaskets. It looks like we're running 70 jets in the front with an 8.5 power valve, and I'll see if I can put another 8.5 back in it, but I don't think I have one on hand, and it didn't come with the rebuild kit, so I might need to go out and purchase another 8.5 power valve. If I'm careful, I should be able to take apart this metering block gasket without it completely tearing. And I did my best, and we got really close, but there's a little bit of scraping that we're gonna have to do here. Let's go ahead and jump on the back side. Let's go ahead and see if we can pull the rear bowl off. And of course, we cannot. So let's go ahead and start prying again. There we go. Let's go ahead and see if we can pull this rear gasket off. And it actually pulls off pretty darn easy. So we got lucky on that one too. The engine ran really well for a lot of years, so I'm not planning to do any jet changes. I just want to get it back to the specs that it was before we took it apart. If you guys pay close attention, you guys will see that this is a spread bore base plate. So we've got the standard 750 size blades in the rear, and we also have 600 size blades in the front. The next step is to remove the vacuum pod. And this one's going to be another set of Allen keys, and we're going to need to take off this E-clip that's right here on the bottom. So I'm going to take my pick, pull this guy out, easy breezy, and it just fell in there, but it'll pop back out in a second. There it is. I'll set this one aside, and then we're going to need to figure out what size these guys are. So the Allen key for the secondary diaphragm is a 9/64 Allen. Now that might actually change on whether you're running a Barry Grant Demon or a Holley Demon. I haven't taken apart a Holley Demon in a while, so I don't remember what those use, but for the Barry Grant Demon, it looks like 9/64 is going to be your guy. Alright, so we got the diaphragm here. Let's go ahead and check if it still works. You can see that there's a little O-ring here, and what you're going to do is we're going to go ahead and push the secondary diaphragm in, and then we're going to plug that hole where the O-ring is, and if we let this go and it pops back out, it's bad, and if it stays inside, it's good. And it looks like it is still in good shape. Let's go ahead and lift my finger up. Alright. So this diaphragm is actually still in good shape, but we're probably still going to replace it. Now after all that, we just need to do the base plate. So to remove the base plate, it just takes these 6 Phillips screws, and that should just come right off. One interesting note about this base plate, however, is that it is a spread bore. It uses the standard 750 size blades in the secondaries, and it uses 600 size blades in the primaries. And so before I get any further, I want to compare the base plate to the main body just to make sure that they do match up the way they're supposed to, and that no funny business is going on. So the base plate just pulls off after you take off the screws. We've got a gasket right here, and the gasket actually looks like it's in pretty good shape, but again, we are going to be replacing it. Matches up pretty good on this side. I'm going to flip it around, and it doesn't match on the other side. So for sure this is the spread bore gasket. Now let's go ahead and try it on the main body, and just looking at it, it does look like it will match up. So it matches up one way. Let's flip it back the other way, and it doesn't match. So we've got a matching base plate with a matching main body. I'm lucky that this guy came out in one piece. In case the kit did not come with the right gasket, I'll be able to reuse this one. Now we're getting to the good stuff. We need to start cleaning some of these parts up and getting ready to get reassembled. So for the main body, there isn't a lot that we can do. The only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure that all 8 air bleeds are free and that the primary squirter is open. So I'm going to go ahead and take off the nozzle. Taking the nozzle off will then expose the needle that sits underneath, so that should just drop out, and it dropped right out. And so we're just going to spray some cleaner through this hole right here and then watch it come out the top. I'm also going to look at the brass needle, and that looks like it's in good shape. Replacement ones of these do not come in the kit, so make sure not to lose this. So let's go ahead and start checking all the orifices. So we're going to start with the accelerator pump. That one's good. That one's good. That one's good. That one's good. So one thing I just noticed about the Speed Demon is that I realized that this is not actually an annular booster. This is a straight leg booster. As you can see, we've got the entry right here, and it just goes straight across. That is not an annular booster. An annular booster feeds the ring around here, and it feeds evenly all the way around. To me, this looks more like a crutch than it does anything else. They probably went with the bigger bores to add airflow, and then in order to prevent the loss of signal to the booster, they just made the booster bigger. So I don't know what the plan was with Demon to do stuff like this, but really nobody does stuff like this anymore, so it makes me wonder if that stuff even worked. Now that I've got the main body completely disassembled, I'm going to go ahead and put it in a tray, and I'm going to clean it up with a plastic bristle brush and some gasoline to get all the gunk off. So this is what the main body looks like after a quick bath in the gasoline bucket. And the reason I use gasoline instead of just hosing it down with brake cleaner is because, number one, the carburetors live with gasoline, so the chromate finish that is on here won't be affected with gasoline being poured on it, scrubbed on it. The second thing is that gasoline is a lot cheaper than brake cleaner, and it does the same job. You just don't have that pressurized effect from the brake cleaner. And so I did use the brake cleaner to kind of clean off a little bit of the inside, but I still wasn't able to get it 100% perfect. If I wanted to take it a step further, I could drop this in a ultrasonic cleaner, and that should get the rest of the junk off of here. But this is going right back into service into a daily driver, so we're not going to worry about it too much. So the first part of the reassembly is that we're going to drop that little brass pintle back in here, because I definitely do not want to lose it. And then we're going to install the squirt nozzle back onto the carburetor. And so I'm going to clean this off first before dropping it in, and we're also going to put a fresh set of gaskets. So the accelerator pump nozzle is a 31, but as you can see, it didn't quite come out as clean as the carburetor, but it doesn't really matter. You're not going to see this piece at all. The screw, however, did come out pretty clean, so it's not going to look too bad. I'm going to be using this Holley rebuild kit that I picked up online. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. This particular one is for a dual feed 4150 style carburetor with a vacuum secondary diaphragm. So inside the kit, we've got our needle and seats and a couple sets of O-rings. So what we're looking for is a pair of flat, round, ring-looking gaskets, which look like this guy right here. And comparing that to the old one right there, they look pretty similar. So we're just going to need 2 of those, and then we'll be able to put the nozzle back onto the main body. So let's go ahead and bring that main body back here, and we're going to take the screw, and we've got to take the second gasket off of it. It's actually on the bottom of the screw. You guys can barely see it right there, but to take that off, you can just take a pick or a screwdriver and just kind of gently push it off, and it should just flake off or shatter off like this one just did, and it crumbled into little tiny pieces. You do want to make sure that you get this completely off and install a brand new gasket if the old one is in bad shape, because if this thing doesn't seat correctly, it'll dribble fuel out the sides of it, and it'll diminish the amount of pump shot that your carburetor is going to shoot out. So now that we've got this area cleaned up, we're going to drop 1 flat gasket, then we're going to put the nozzle upside down, and then we're going to put the second gasket right there also upside down. So everything's upside down right now. Then we're just going to hold it all together with 2 fingers and then drop it into the main body, making sure that both gaskets end up where they're supposed to be. And I'm going to go ahead and snug that up by hand. You do not want to use power tools for this. As soon as you get it pretty snug where you feel that it will not turn, that's when you stop, you leave it alone, and you move on to the next step. The main body is now checked and ready to go. So now we're going to move on to the next easiest part, and that's just going to be the base plate. So we're going to check it for wear on the throttle shafts. So we're just going to open them up halfway and then kind of wiggle them around, no play. And then we're going to do the same thing to the back side and wiggle that around, and I've got no play. So the base plate is still in good shape. Everything looks good. If we look at the accelerator pump diaphragm, it is a 50cc diaphragm with a little bit of wear on it, but it still looks like it's good to go. I'm not going to make any adjustments to the accelerator pump arm yet. The only thing I'm going to do is drop this in my bucket and clean it up a little bit so we can bolt it onto the main body. All right, so I went ahead and I cleaned up the base plate that we were looking at. There's a lot of surface rust, as you would assume, of this thing being in an open engine bay for several years. So we've got oxidation here, here, a little bit right there. Some of this is just dirt that I was not able to remove even after blasting it with carburetor cleaner. So this is as good as it's going to get. I won't be able to get it any cleaner than this. Since now we're ready to put the base plate back onto the main body, we're going to go ahead and look for the gasket that we talked about earlier. And so I'm going to pull out all the gaskets that came included, and hopefully one of them does fit. If not, I might have an extra one sitting on the shelf. So here's one. That one doesn't work. This one also does not work, and this one for sure does not work. So lucky for us, I've got a bunch more gaskets. Hopefully one of these happens to fit, so I'll just fast forward through me going through this, and hopefully I end up finding one. If I don't end up finding one, I still have a solution. So after going through a whole stack of gaskets, I was not able to find one that fit how I need it to, and I have a bunch of 650 gaskets and I do have a bunch of 750 gaskets, but the issue is that, for example, this is a 750 gasket and it lines up perfectly to the 750 side of the base plate, but then when you look over to the primary side, it does not fit very well. Not only does it not match up to the port, but you could also see that the transfer slot is a little exposed. So if I line these guys up as best as I can right here, you guys can see just how much of that transfer slot is exposed right on top. But not only the transfer slot, a little part of the well is exposed as well. So in order to get a new gasket to fit on here properly, here's what we're going to do. We're going to overlay a 650 gasket, and I'm going to drop the base plate bolts back into their proper locations, and then we're going to port match the gasket to the 750 side of the base plate. We actually don't need to remove that much, just enough so that we don't have any kind of overhang into the throttle bores. Also, I want to note that this particular base plate has a provision where these two holes here, sometimes they're either offset or they're straight. This base plate can accommodate both, so you don't have to worry too much about that. So I've just got to flip this around this way, and with this box cutter knife, we're just going to go ahead and do a little bit of trimming and get this as close as we can. It doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect fit, but it does need to be close enough. You can just glide it up against the throttle bores, being extremely careful not to jam it into your fingers. If this was a customer carburetor, I'd probably just order the correct gasket if I could find it. And if I couldn't find it, then I'd probably have to do a better job at port matching it than I am. But this isn't rocket science, it's just a little bit dangerous to your fingers. And like I said, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. A sharper blade would also help quite a bit. This one is getting a little dull, but I just got it all finished up. I'm just going to dust this thing off, get all the junk off of it, make sure I don't have any of the paper gaskets stuck on here. And now we can take the newly adjusted gasket and drop it onto the main body alongside the base plate. Once you've got all 6 bolts seated, just give everything a once over and make sure it's snugged down by hand. You don't want to use any power tools here, because if you strip one of these, it's going to be a very bad day for you. Once you've got the base plate to the main body assembled, you can go ahead and make some final adjustments to that gasket, so that way it doesn't get caught up on the throttle blades. Now that that's out of the way, I can go ahead and put the main body back onto this pedestal, make it easier for me to work on it. So now we're going to jump back to the secondary diaphragm. So I've got the complete diaphragm right here. We're going to go ahead and take it apart and clean up all the individual pieces. One thing that you should note is that when you take the main cover off, sometimes there's a little marble underneath, a little ball bearing. You do not want to lose that. You're going to want to make sure to put that back exactly how it was when you took it apart, and do not lose anything that's inside of the vacuum secondary pod. This particular pod has a quick change cap, so it's got like a little O-ring here that seals up against the cap, and it allows you to change the secondary spring pretty much on demand for fine-tuning of your carburetor when you got it out on the road. So you can go ahead and make changes without having to take apart pretty much the whole carburetor. So normally the marble would actually sit right here. Here's a screw hole, and the marble would sit right there. The marble on this one is already gone, so we're not going to worry about it, but we are going to remove this seal that's right here, and then we're going to take all these pieces and clean them up real quick. So I just took these pieces back out of the bucket, gave everything a little bit of a scrub. Considering how old this carburetor is, it really doesn't look bad at all. As you can see, there is a little bit of pitting from oxidation, but overall it's still in really good shape. So that is the pod. Then we've got the cap, and then after that we've got the lid, and now we've got the lid, and then we just need the cap that goes on top of the lid. It looks like this thing was either painted or powder coated once upon a time, and it did not like to be dunked in fuel versus the other stuff that was either anodized or it's made out of plastic. This one did not appreciate the gasoline bath, but oh well. So in order to get this reassembled, we're going to start with the new diaphragm. As you can see, this one is a little bit more malleable. It's not as stiff as this one was, so this one will be easier to open than this one will. By replacing it now, we're also eliminating any possible problems in the near future. So we're just going to go ahead and drop this into the pod, and we're going to align the hole that we talked about with the marble. That one goes right there, and then the 4 open holes go for the lid. And then we've got this guy right here, and then we've also got a hole for where that marble would go, which is just the vacuum chamber. And at this point, once you got it lined up, you can just hold it, put all 4 bolts in. This one's got a little cap on top, so we don't need to put 2 of them on right now. So I'm going to snug on the other 2 and make sure those are good, and then we'll put the spring, the gasket, and then the last 2 bolts. And again, for this, you don't really need to tighten it up a whole bunch. You just got to pinch the rubber diaphragm between the lid and the body, and you should be fine. So now we're going to go ahead and grab the little cap. It's got a dimple in the middle, and we're going to go put the spring on that. If it didn't have this cap, then you would go and install the spring on the lid, and you would just have to struggle a little bit more with getting this to line up. But then after that, now we just have to put this gasket back on. If you do not put this gasket back on, the secondary side will not function. So once we got that going, we can go ahead and put the 2 bolts, screws, whatever you want to call them, back in here. And then we're going to go ahead and snug those back down. And after that, we just have 1 gasket that's going to go right behind the vacuum pod. If you want to test this before you put it back together, it's the same as we did it before. You just push the diaphragm into the pod. We hold the area down where the seal goes and then let it go. If you let go of the diaphragm and it stays where it's at, it's good. And if you move your thumb and it pops back out, then you're good. So now let's go ahead and find the replacement seal for this. There's a little baggie with miscellaneous parts, and oddly enough, there is an O-ring there that does seem to match the O-ring that we pulled off of this guy. So we can safely assume that these are going to be these same parts. So I'm going to toss that O-ring to the side. I'm going to use a little bit of grease on this O-ring, number 1, so it doesn't pop out as I'm trying to install it, and number 2, it'll allow it to give it a tiny bit better seal up against the main body. But I gotta be careful not to put so much grease that I end up blocking the hole, because nothing is going to flow through here besides vacuum. And if I end up filling this up with grease, I'm not going to be able to get vacuum through here. So now that I've got a little bit of grease on there, I could shake this guy. The seal doesn't come off. So let's go ahead and put this back on the main body using the same bolts that we used to take it off. So I'm going to go ahead and hook the diaphragm back onto the base plate, and then we're going to try to line up these bolts. So they're going to take these middle 3 bolts, and those are going to be the 3 Allen bolts that we took off earlier. The 9/64ths, I think. Now, if you wanted to switch these out for some Phillips head screws, now would be the time. The difference on the Holley versus the Demon is that the Demon has 3 of the bolts that are the exact same size, and Holley has different sizes. And same thing, you want to make sure not to over torque them. These guys are not known to come off, so you don't need to do some gorilla strength on here. You don't need any kind of thread locker. Just snug them down and let it go. Now we're going to put the E-clip that we took off earlier. We're going to go ahead and put that back on. Some kits actually come with replacement E-clips. This one did not, so we're going to go ahead and reuse the same one we had. This one is a little worn out because it's just a little too easy to install, but it still does the job just fine. So we've got the base plate, main body, vacuum secondary pod installed. Now we're starting to get into the meat and potatoes. All right, now that we've got the main body nice and clean, it's time to move on to the metering blocks. This is actually where the crux of the rebuild is going to take. We're going to go through and make sure these metering blocks flow the way they're supposed to and that there isn't anything jammed up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the power valve. We're going to pull out the jets. But we're going to leave the whistle on here because it's not that easy to remove, so we're just going to leave it in there. But we are going to take off the excess gasket material and give everything a nice shine. Besides that, we also have to remove the idle mixture screws along with the little seals that are inside. And normally you can use a flathead screwdriver to remove the jets, but I tend to prefer using a jet removal tool because I've ruined a lot of jets in the past by using a screwdriver. It slips out, it chips the brass jets, and then you're in trouble. So we're going to go ahead and remove all of this. We're going to put the 65s in one place and then the 70 somethings in another place. And we're just gonna have to make sure that we put everything back the way it was. All right, so I've got the metering blocks as clean as I can get it without getting too abrasive on the surface. There are a few stains like here, but they're not going to do anything to hurt the performance, so I'm just gonna leave it there. If you're too aggressive on the cleaning, you could damage the sealing surface and then do a little bit more harm than good. So in order to avoid that, I'm not going to get too abrasive. It doesn't really seem to matter. But what does matter is that we have to check these metering blocks for any kind of blockages and make sure everything's free. So we're going to start at the main circuit, then we're gonna go into the idle feed restrictors, the idle circuit, and then the emulsion circuit. And what we're looking for is that we just want to make sure that wherever we spray carburetor cleaner through, it leaves through the other side. So for example, if I spray through the main feed on the top, it should come out of the main jets. And if I feed it through the idle feed restrictor here, it should come out down there. The only thing you really have to worry about is if this thing hits you in the eyes. I have accidentally sprayed myself in the eyes when I didn't realize what passage was going where, and it went in through one way, it came out the other way and right into my eye. So be very, very careful when doing this, but you're gonna wanna make sure you spray every single hole, make sure the spray goes in and it exits somewhere else. And here's a quick tech tip. If you block the main jet with your finger, you should be able to get a bunch of spray to come out of the emulsion circuit. So check this out. That way you make sure you don't have anything plugged up here in the emulsion circuit. Now that we've got that out of the way, it's time to reassemble it. I'm gonna go ahead and start with the idle screws. Now before I can start reassembling the metering blocks, I wanna take my jets and the idle mixture screws and drop them into like a cup of gasoline and shake them around a little bit and then bring them out and clean them. So that way they can come out a little bit cleaner than they are right now. And gasoline is safe for this kind of stuff. So I should be able to get the crud off while still cleaning it. So let's do that. So after giving these guys a quick rinse, I gotta take the little gaskets off. And these are pretty dry at this point, so I can take a pair of side cutters and just kind of pinch them, and they should just break off, fracture pretty easily. They're like, these are old cork. Some of them are made out of rubber, but the removal is pretty much the same. Just a little bit of a squeeze and the whole thing comes off. Just be very careful not to damage the threads and you should be good to go. The seals actually came out when I pulled out the idle mixture screws, so I didn't get a chance to show you how to pull them out. The easiest way to remove them is by taking the idle mixture screw, running it all the way out, and then putting it back in, giving it like 3 or 4 turns before it actually catches on the threads of the metering block, and just pull on it, and the seal should come out with the little screw. So to install the new seals back in here, you're going to put the seal back onto the mixture screw, and you're going to thread it in about 2 or 3 turns. After that, I like to put a little bit of grease right here on the end of it, just to make it easier for these guys to slide in, but do not get any grease on the tip of the screw because it will impede fuel flow, at least in the beginning. So the grease is just so that the seal doesn't hang up on the aluminum, and it should go right in. If it doesn't go all the way in, you can go ahead and pull the screw back out and then poke it so that it seats all the way to the bottom. While you're there, wipe off the remaining part of the grease and then run your mixture screw all the way in until it bottoms out. And after your mixture screw is seated all the way inside of the metering block, you're going to go ahead and turn it back out 1.5 turns. So try not to put too much force down on it when you're first putting it on, so that way you don't damage the tip of the screw or the metering block. It just needs to stop, and then you're gonna run it back out. So now that I'm done with this one, I'm gonna do the other 3, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, so this is the last one. I'm just gonna run it out 1, 2, and 3. 3 half turns equals 1.5 turns. So now that we got that out of the way, I'm just gonna put the jets back in because that seems to be the next logical step. I know that this is the secondary metering block because there's no power valve. Primary metering block has a power valve, but there are some carburetors that have provisions for power valves front and rear, so make sure you realize which one's the front and which one's the rear one before you take it apart. On this one, it's pretty easy, so I'm not going to worry about it. So we're going to go ahead and put the 70 jets back in on the rear, and then the primaries are running 65s. So I'm going to use my jet tool to run this back in. And by the way, this is a Proform jet tool, but I also have a Moroso jet tool. Both of them seem to work pretty good, but you do have a little bit more leverage on the Proform tool. But if you're scared about stripping it, then the Moroso one's probably a little bit better for you. So this one's done. This metering block, 100% bolted on the car, good to go. Now we're going to go ahead and do the front metering block. We're going to put the 65s back in here. As mentioned before, I already cleaned them out. I already checked them to make sure there's no debris in here. So I should have no problems on the main circuit of this carburetor. And the idle mixture screws are good. So the last thing to put on this is going to be the power valve. So I've got the old power valve right here, and the old one is an 8.5. I might have mentioned this earlier, but I don't have a replacement 8.5. I'm going to need to install something a little bit different. So the one that comes standard in most of these kits is a 6.5 power valve, and like I mentioned, we had an 8.5 power valve in here before. The only thing that's going to happen is that the power valve is going to open up later in the RPM range at a lower vacuum reading. So you start off at a high vacuum reading. As you're climbing up the hill, vacuum drops. Once it drops to a certain amount, power valve will open, and 8.5 will open earlier than a 6.5. So if you want the fuel to come in earlier, you get an 8.5. If you want it to come in later, you can run the standard 6.5. The 8.5 that was in here was actually in here for probably 4 or 5 years, and it's actually still good. It feels good, it's probably fine, but it was for a tune that we set up for a truck. This is on a small A-body Mopar, so I don't think we're gonna need as much fuel to get the car going. So we're gonna go ahead and try the 6.5 that came in the kit. If for whatever reason I see some hesitation, we'll go in and then we'll purchase a new power valve. So the kit comes with a seal, and you've got to actually be very careful with these, because if you over torque them, the seal will split and it'll leak fuel into the vacuum well on the carburetor, and then it's going to run pig rich at idle. So we're just going to go ahead and tighten it up by hand. I'm going to take a quick look, make sure there's no split in the gasket. Everything looks good, just a physical check. Perfect. So now both metering blocks are good to go. Before we can actually install the metering blocks, we actually have to go in and redo the fuel bowls, because you can't install the metering blocks without installing the fuel bowls at the same time. So what I'm going to do, same thing, I'm going to go and put these inside my bucket of gas, and I'll give them a scrub-a-dub-dub and make sure these are all nice and clean before we start taking them apart. All right, so after a quick rinse, these guys look pretty good. And so now we've got to take it apart. There's only 2 things that we've got to look at. Well, 3 if you count the accelerator pump on the primary side. But we're looking at the float height and the needle and seat. So actually, if you look at this one, the float is set way too low. You see that the window's here, the float's up here. If we look at the other side, you can see that the float sits way lower when compared to the window. And in fact, if we put them side by side, it's pretty obvious. So we're going to go and replace the needle and seats, but when we do that, we're going to set the float to a new level, and we're going to keep them the same front and back. So it looks like the back one's a little bit higher than the front one. We're going to go ahead and fix that up. We're also going to replace the diaphragm in the accelerator pump, and in fact, I'll go ahead and remove that first, just so I can look at it and make sure I don't have to do anything to this. So to remove the accelerator pump diaphragm, you just have to take off these 4 screws. This is a 50cc accelerator pump diaphragm, so it is a little bit taller. I'll show you guys what the difference of that is. I've just got 1 screw left to remove before I can take the cover off. All right, so that was the last screw. The cover just comes off like this. As you can see, it's just a big piece of zinc. And then we've got the accelerator pump diaphragm, which is this one right here. And it looks like it's pretty shriveled up and it's pretty stiff. Definitely time for a new one. And if we look below that, we've got the spring. The spring looks like it's in good shape. And then this is actually interesting. So if you look here, we have a little umbrella, but the umbrella is actually facing the wrong way. So actually, the accelerator pump probably did not work at all on this carburetor, because if the umbrella does not seal up against the bowl, the fuel will backflow into the fuel bowl and you won't get any accelerator pump. It's not going to run good. So we're going to go ahead and rip that one off. It feels like it's, oh, look how bad it is. As soon as I touched it, it just completely tore apart. So this thing was definitely due. I just kind of rubbed on it and the whole thing came apart. So I'll show you guys how to install the new one. There's a little piece right there. We're going to want to take that out, but we're going to take off the needle and seat first. So to take off the needle and seat, you're actually supposed to undo this top screw and then turn it out with this nut. But the way I do it is I just grab it straight from the nut and then I just turn the whole thing. The whole thing's coming out anyway, so we don't need to really be careful. And we've got the old needle and seat out. As you can see, the O-ring, actually you might not be able to see, but the O-ring is completely flat. Right there. So it was probably having overflow issues as well, which is probably why the float was set so low. Now the float will actually go all the way to the top where it's supposed to go, and we've got to get rid of this little orange guy or we're going to run into some issues. So if we look underneath the float, there's some dust, a little bit of debris. I'm just going to wipe that off. The stuff here on the bottom isn't a huge deal, but you should want to clean it up, especially since you're already in there. It is now looking pretty good. Before we forget, let's go ahead and put that new umbrella in there. So we just put it down the center of the hole, and then we're going to yank it up from this side. So we're going to pull on it and it'll just seat up against here. And this one actually seals against the bowl, unlike the other one. And now we've actually got to cut this little tail off, or what's going to happen is that you won't be able to get any fuel flow. So as you can see, it is stuck. The float's not going to be able to run all the way down. You're going to get insufficient fuel flow. The car's going to run kind of funny. So you're going to want to cut all that off. And that's just going to be with the pair of side cutters or a razor blade if you have one. And just cut it off right there at the nub. And now you've got full travel on the float. So me personally, I don't like to replace the needle and seats. I actually like to reuse them, just change the seals out and then be on my way. But if you do have to, or if you want to for peace of mind, it's pretty straightforward. You just take the nut and the screw off the top and you could just throw the rest of it away. Me, I'm gonna put in a little box in case I need one for later, but I've got the new one right here. So the O-ring on this one is not flat. So the way that I like to put it back into the bowl is I actually like to use a little bit of grease, and I use grease a lot on these carburetors. You just have to be very careful on how you use it because this will not dissolve as easily with the gasoline. So if you put too much on it, you're going to be in trouble. So you just need a little bit so you don't hang up the O-ring and cut it. I used to deal with a lot of issues with the needle and seat hanging up a little bit on the threads because of issues in the casting, and it was always really hard to get a good seal. But by using a little bit of grease, everything ends up a little bit easier. So this guy slipped right in. Now the only thing I got to do is replace the seals on the nut and the screw with new ones, and then I should be able to get it right back in there. So the old seals do get a little stuck, but with your fingernail or with the razor blade, you can just pop them right off. This one's gonna need a little bit more persuasion, and there it goes. So you're gonna have one big seal, one little seal. So this guy is the same top and bottom, so just pick and choose which one's going to be the big seal, and which one's going to be the little seal. So the little seal goes on top, the big seal goes on the bottom. So if you're gonna put it on the bowl, you put big seal first, you put the nut, and then you put the little seal, and then you grab the screw and then just thread it in by hand, like about halfway down. You don't need it all the way in, at least not yet. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip it upside down, and now I'm going to turn the nut right here on the needle and seat, and I'm going to keep going until I get the float to the right height. So you could see the window that's right there on the left. We want that casting mark a little bit below the halfway mark, or technically above if you're holding it upside down. So we want it probably about a quarter of the way up, and that's just to play it safe. So if we hold it, I'm gonna hold it up with my finger so you guys can see, but I kind of want it about right there or so. I don't want it too high and I don't want it too low, but I do want to give myself a little bit of leeway with the buoyancy of the float. So the lower it is, the more the fuel is going to push up against that needle and seat. It's going to create a better seal. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish tightening down that screw, and instead of putting my screwdriver on here, I'm just going to tighten this nut by itself without doing anything else, and that will lock it into its place. So I'm just going to tighten it down like that, and we're done. We don't have to do anything else. The float is set and we are good to go. If you guys are wondering, this is a 5/8 sized nut. So if you grab a 5/8 wrench, or maybe even a 16mm, but that's going to be a little big, you can go ahead and snug this down with that. This is actually a float height adjustment tool. So this guy will catch on the nut, and then this will catch onto the screw. So you can undo the nut and adjust the screw separately. I don't use this too often because I already have my method of adjusting, but either way, it still seems to work just fine. I'm not going to move it from here. So this bowl is pretty much good to go. We just need to put the diaphragm right back on the bottom. Now that we've got the float set and the check valve in here, it's time to put together the accelerator pump diaphragm. But before we do that, I want to show you something. So this is an original like 80s, 70s, 50cc accelerator pump diaphragm. The newer ones actually are cylindrical. They look like this, but they function typically about the same. One just looks more square than the other one. So aside from the cosmetic differences, there is something for you to be aware of. So if you flip these upside down, you can immediately tell that there is less surface area on the new style diaphragm housing than the old one. In fact, on the sides, you have very little surface area. So if your sealing surface is not perfect, you've got a higher chance of leakage from this one than you do on this one, which has more surface area. But aside from that, this one's actually a reproduction, and there is another glaring difference, and I don't know if you guys can spot it. How about if I switch out the old one for a reproduction one that I've started working on? Do you guys see some differences now? If you guys say the little circles, what's the little circles doing there? Those are part of the casting process, and if you look closely, you can see them here, 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 here. So on this one that I've started fixing, I actually had a leak from here to here because of this little hole. And the surface area for the sealing gasket is basically non-existent. So I actually had leakage from here. The fuel would sit in here, run through here, and then run toward the outside of here. It was causing a lot of problems. Once I took it apart and looked at it, it was glaringly obvious what the issue was. So what I'm doing is I'm putting this on the belt sander, giving it a nice flat surface, shaving down just enough to get rid of these bumps, and that way I'll be able to reinstall it and avoid any kind of leaks. This older one ran in other carburetors for years and years and years, and it's been in my personal possession for the last 4 or 5 years, and I've never had a problem. If you look at the casting, there's really no serious imperfections that'll prevent this from sealing up. So I won't have to do any kind of repairs to this one, but if you guys are having issues with your diaphragm housings, go ahead and check that because it might be a culprit, but for me, not so much. So let's go ahead and grab the new diaphragm. So the kit that I got came with 2 30cc diaphragms and 1 50cc diaphragm that I have here. So we're just gonna go ahead and put the spring back where it was. We're gonna drop the diaphragm on there. And so once we have that, we're going to go ahead and drop this guy back in here. And then we're gonna put the screws back in. For the screws, you don't really have to like hulk down on them like that much. You just go ahead and run them in with your regular screwdriver and snug them up. And you only have to snug them up a little bit. You don't have to go super hard on those things. But after you're all done, you just have to make sure that you have proper operation without any kind of binding, which looks like it's working perfectly fine for me. The last thing I'm going to do is actually remove this fuel fitting, because I'm going to add some thread locker, and I'll show you why in a second. So I just took the fuel fitting off, and I realized that this guy was actually missing the gasket, the steel shim gasket that goes in between the fitting and the fuel bowl. So I pulled one out of a spare carburetor that I have, and normally you'd want to purchase these new, but the problem is that because this is a Demon carburetor, the fittings are not the same as a Holley carburetor, and so finding this particular steel shim gasket is going to be a little bit difficult. Obviously you can get it online, you can get anything online, but I really don't want to place an order just for something like that. So I'll probably order some in just to have some on hand, but as of right now, we're just going to reinstall this one. I might have already mentioned this, but this is going on a personal vehicle, so I can afford to do a few shortcuts here and there. But if this was a 100% customer build, I would definitely just not only replace the gaskets, I would also have to replace the fittings as well, because these might be a little too worn out at this point. But I'm willing to risk it for myself to save myself a little bit of money, even though it might bite me in the butt later on. So you just saw me put some thread locker on there, and the reason for that was because if I have to change the fuel rail, or if I want to replace the bowls, or if I want to do something and the fuel rail has to be removed from the carburetor, it's so annoying to have the fittings try to come out with the fuel rail. So in order to prevent that, I go ahead and I use blue thread locker, and then I snug this guy down. That way when it's time to install the fuel rail, this guy is not going anywhere when we go to take it back off. So now this fuel bowl is completely done. The only thing we got to do now is replace the needle and seat and add some thread locker to the second fuel bowl, and we should be 100% done. So I just locked up the fuel fitting, so I don't need to use thread locker anymore, but I went ahead and I pulled the needle and seat out, and this one actually has a decent O-ring. And the reason for that is because I actually replaced this O-ring probably last year, so it still has a decent amount of life left, still squishy and everything, but we're still going to go ahead and replace it. The only thing that I'm going to do with this is save it for later, keep it in a pile, and just grab it in case I need it. So same as before, we just take the two gaskets, grab the new needle and seat, put a little lube on it, and then put it back together. Alright, so I already finished up and installed the rear fuel bowl. All that's left is to install the front fuel bowl, but there are a couple things associated that I need to tell you guys first. So we already assembled the metering block, everything's all good to go here. Now we've got to install the gaskets. So the bowl gasket's actually pretty straightforward. You got 4 pins up here, 3 pins on the bottom. Make sure to line up the pins and you are good to go, no problem there. And you are golden. Now for the accelerator pump, there could be a problem. So if you use the gasket included in the kit, if the gaskets look like this, then you are perfectly fine to use either one. It doesn't really matter. But if you get a gasket that looks like this, you better not use it unless you want some problems. So looking at these gaskets side by side, it's going to be glaringly obvious what the problem is. So the area around the accelerator pump channel is sealed off on the correct gasket that uses an accelerator pump, and on this gasket there is a cutout. So if you end up using this gasket on this metering block, guess what's going to happen? Every single time that you're going to want to run the accelerator pump, it's going to go through the metering block, out through here, and instead of going through the nozzle, it's just going to spill into the vacuum chamber, and it's going to cause stumbling and hesitation. So you want to make sure that when you are installing the gasket, you install the correct gasket, and that's going to be this one, that covers the accelerator pump passage. So lucky this kit doesn't come with one of the other gaskets. It only came with 2 of these ones, which in my opinion is way better. So now let's go ahead and drop the metering block into the fuel bowl. Then we're going to install the fuel bowl onto the rest of the carburetor, but we're going to lift up the arm for the accelerator pump, and then we're going to just set this on the pins, and now we're going to run the bolts back in. These bolts have black nylon gaskets, and you can choose to replace them if you want. The kit does come with brand new ones, but these ones are in pretty good shape, so I'd much rather keep the new ones as a spare. So let's go ahead and tighten this down, and I will walk you through a few more things before we finish closing up this carburetor. All right, so continuing our conversation about the accelerator pump, the last adjustment that we need to do is going to be here at the accelerator pump arm. Depending on the adjustment, that adjusts the preload to the accelerator pump diaphragm. And as of right now, this guy is too tight. There's a reason that I did not reset the idle on the base plate, and that's because I wanted to do all of this and then adjust it before I raise the idle up and prepare it for starting. That way, when the carburetor gets adjusted back down to its original setting, the accelerator pump arm is going to be very, very close. But it's way too tight right now, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the bolts going this way, and that'll loosen it up at the arm. So depending on the model, it's going to be some sort of combination between 7/16 and 3/8, or 11 millimeters and 10 millimeters if you're not from the US. So to make it looser, you're going to want to tighten it, which seems a little counterproductive, but that's just how it is. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up, and I'm looking for a little tiny bit of gap. If the arm is too tight, you're not going to have access to the full shot of the accelerator pump. So when you go to full throttle, you have to check to make sure that you have a little bit more clearance, that if you wanted to go further down, you could. But if this guy is already like this, and then you go to accelerate it more, it's going to bottom out on the fuel bowl, and you won't have access to wide open throttle. So you want to make sure that you want to keep it on the looser side, but do give it a little bit of preload, so that way it works as soon as you touch the throttle. While we're on the topic, I want to show you guys something here on the base plate. I put a couple markings here, M and P, and what that means is manifold and ported. Manifold meaning underneath the throttle blades, ported meaning above the throttle blades. So if you look here, one of these nipples actually ends up at the primary throttle blades, and the other one ends up going back into the carburetor. So the one going back into the carburetor, that one is going to be your ported vacuum, like for your vacuum advance, and then the other one is going to be manifold vacuum, like for your vacuum advance. The reason I said it like that is because some people like to run ported vacuum, some people like to run manifold vacuum, and the easiest way to find out which one's which is that if you put your finger on it, one of them will have suction on your finger and the other one won't. But I wrote on it on top just so we can hook everything up ahead of time, put the caps on it, and then leave it alone. The only thing left to do now is to leave the carburetor about 2 turns in on the accelerator, so it'll idle around 1500, 2000 RPM. That way when you inevitably flood it when you're trying to start it for the first time, you're going to have enough air going through there that the car will actually idle. Once you get it to a proper temperature, you'll be able to run that throttle down and then set the idle, which I will show you guys in a future video. I do have an old version of that video, but I'm going to do a new one for 2025, so stay tuned for that. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and post them in the comments down below. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher signing out.